This is Word on the Streets, a podcast about the Buttles and Indian Corridor Improvement Project. This podcast is created by the City of Midland, Michigan, and produced by the MCTV Network. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of Word on the Streets, a podcast about information, updates, and perspective on the Buttles and Indian Corridor Improvement Project in Midland, Michigan. I'm your host, Katie Geyer. Now, last month, we covered Part 1 of Fact or Fiction Roadway Edition, and there was so many facts that we had to do 2 parts. So now, enjoy Part 2. So this one is a no-brainer for me, given what we have worked on over the past couple of years. And really what we've said, even in this podcast, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to address this one. Vehicle speeds on a street in a city have no impact on the surrounding properties.
So this is actually one that I cringe at when I hear the statement, because vehicle speeds absolutely do have an impact on surrounding areas.
Yes.
They don't happen in vacuums. They're not completely without any type of interaction with the surrounding context, and it's very important to recognize that. But it's also kind of difficult for people that are motorists to really gain that understanding, because when you're in the environment of your own car, you don't have the same type of experience that someone is that has when they're sitting or maybe standing on the side of the road as you zoom by.
Right.
And so there's this whole, actually a lot of driver psychology research that has been done that has really tried to tease out that psychological understanding of the environments that you have as you move through a city in a car versus on a bike or on an e-scooter or possibly even walking.
Okay.
But all of that is very important because it's not a vacuum and everything is related to one another within the context of that small environment. So higher speeds do mean, with vehicles, the higher possibility of road noise and the possibility of crashes, both of which make an area more undesirable to live in.
Sure.
Certainly road noise is a huge thing that people talk about, and we actually spend lots of money across the state in the nation to put up road noise barriers and other things to try and prevent the negative impacts of that on specific areas. But beyond that, speeds have a great impact on the desirability of people using other forms of mobility.
Okay.
So think about you walking on a residential street where cars are going 25 miles an hour compared to maybe walking down Eastman Road or Eastman Avenue between, say, Wading Forest and Sugnut Road at 45 miles an hour. Very different type of experience, and most people are probably going to choose that residential neighborhood walk as opposed to one right along a busy corridor.
Sure.
And that has an impact on the amount of people that are walking in those particular areas, because people walk and they bike where they feel the safest.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I've walked Eastman before. I've been really making an effort to kind of get out and walk in different areas of the community, whether it seems super walkable or not. And I know even going down the sidewalk on Eastman, especially up kind of towards that Wackerly corridor, I was thinking, I feel too close to these cars on the sidewalk, which is obviously not on the road. But because people are going so quickly through there, it feels unsafe, even though technically am I safe on the sidewalk away from the curb? Absolutely. But just that feeling like you're too close to traffic has a huge barrier to people wanting to use other forms of mobility through there.
Absolutely. And human experience is largely based off of feeling and doing things that necessarily, or that create a really good experience and really good feeling because of the way that they've been designed, and avoiding ones that aren't as desirable. And so that's kind of why people loathe being stuck in traffic.
Right.
Because it's not a very good feeling. We don't enjoy it, and it's something that we don't necessarily want, and therefore we want to design streets that are able to move traffic quickly. But when we do that, there are trade-offs. There's always going to be trade-offs as it relates to the built environment and what you're able to facilitate. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the built environment, because speed, as it relates to car traffic, also has limiting factors on uses that surround it.
Okay.
When you look at some of the most auto-oriented places, not only in Midland, but around the state of Michigan, there's not Main Street types of businesses. When you think about like the photos of the city of Midland, or just the place of Midland back in the early 1900s, it looked very differently, and the way that we built things was very, very different, because it was all at a scale built for pedestrians and horse and buggy and other things like that.
Right.
As we introduced the automobile, we then created high moving and fast moving corridors, and the types of development that surround that caters more to the automobile. And so you don't end up with things like sidewalk cafes or sidewalk retail.
Right.
You don't have residential buildings that get located close to the street because the road noise and because of possible crashes or other things like that. And so you really then create a very spread out type of environment that ultimately happens because of needing to facilitate automotive traffic in between all those places, and to do it where there's the convenience that's giving to people being able to get from place to place rather quickly.
Yeah.
So we kind of sprawl, and we talk. I don't think we've talked about this in the podcast, but over Midland's history, we've actually sprawled so much that we've become the 5th largest city by square area.
Yeah. Yep.
But we're not even in the top 25 in population, and that's a metric used, or that's within the state of Michigan. So we're top 5 in the state of Michigan on area, but not even the top 25 on population. So we are a very sprawled type of suburban design.
Yeah, that's wild to think about that we've got lots of stuff within our city limits, right? But in terms of people, we're pretty spread out or concentrated to certain areas for sure.
Yes.
And I'm glad that you brought up the built environment and how that is impacted so much by speed, because if you go downtown right now, we just closed Main Street for 3 blocks again, our 2nd year doing pedestrian plazas. I was actually out last night and experienced that, and it is just such a different feeling to be down there where cars are just not simply driving or parking right there. We had lots of children literally playing in the street. We've got cornhole boards set up, there's seating, and even just to sit outside at one of those outdoor dining establishments, you just realize how much quieter it is. You're able to have a conversation without the constant road noise of bikes or of motorcycles and vehicles constantly going through and stopping at those stop signs and sitting there while you're trying to eat and talk. It's such a change. And, obviously that might not work 100% of the time for every single place to have the roadway shut down.
Certainly not.
But I definitely encourage anybody who has the ability to experience what that's like to go from a vehicle-centered corridor for a long time, which main streets have become over the years, back to kind of this epicenter of gathering and community where vehicles are not the priority. It is a wild experiment, I think, and I personally really enjoy it.
It is, and it's certainly it's an experiment in livability. It's an experiment in being able to create places surrounding a very focused type of reality, and a lot of that is really driven by like placemaking type of initiatives. This is something that is trying to create a sense of place within downtown that's very different, very unique, and very open to a variety of people to be able to get there. I should also make mention too on that, because a lot of times what we hear from people is, well, I like to use my car. Maybe I have a mobility impairment or something like that, and so I want to be able to use my car to be able to still going and access those things. Yeah. And that's something that we do really recognize at the city, and we've made very concerted effort to ensure that we still have properly accessible barrier-free parking spaces where there's very little impediments for people to be able to use their mobility device to be able to traverse those spaces. I mean, the entire street for 3 blocks, not the entire street, but those 3 blocks were actually built for pedestrians in mind to have no curbs. Yep. And that's huge for mobility opportunity for people that maybe are using an Amigo or other type of device that assists them. We want this to be a space for all people, and so we've made a very concerted effort to do that, to try and get as many people down there as we possibly can. I was also down there last night too, and just the feeling of it and just the sense of community, and walking up from Tunes by the Tridge that had just a fantastic crowd. It's a remarkable place, and it makes me just so happy that we live in a place like Midland and we have the type of summers that we do where we do these kind of things. Yeah,
absolutely. And just to point out really quickly, again, I know we're talking a lot about mobility, and when I think we talk about mobility and start talking down the rabbit hole beyond cars, a lot of people think we're automatically only talking about walking, biking, and non-motorized. We actually have a transportation network within the city that's a department of our city. It's Dial-A-Ride Transportation. We talked about them earlier. It's a curb-to-curb bus system, so that is definitely a motorized form of transportation that the city operates, but it is really geared towards that shared mobility, if you will, of people being able to mass use this system. And, while right now you do still have to reserve a ride and reserve a pickup time and a drop-off time and things like that, you can go anywhere within the city limits using Dial-A-Ride. Dial-A-Ride, and those buses are specifically outfitted to assist with mobility devices such as power chairs, such as wheelchairs, people who have challenges getting up and down stairs. There's a lift on that vehicle.
Yes.
And our drivers are trained in using them and trained in assisting and securing passengers who have disabilities, who have mobility devices. So if you are concerned about parking and access, check out Dial-A-Ride. If you go to cityofmidlandmi.gov/DART, you can find out all about their times of operation. They're operating 7 days a week. But the service hours for the phones are not 7 days a week to my knowledge at this point, but you can get a ride 7 days a week, and they will take you literally anywhere. If you want to go downtown and you say, I want to be dropped off, at Molasses, they'll go right up next to where that parking area is, as close as they can get. There's a bus shelter down there again now.
Yep.
And you really don't have to worry about parking your vehicle. You don't have to worry about how you're going to get in and out. They'll take you to an accessible mobile place for you where you can get out. So, that's something to keep in mind. Mobility doesn't have to mean just walking and biking. There are other options for transportation. And so we really want people to take advantage of those if they can.
There is, yes. And even cars. I mean, cars is a form of mobility,
absolutely.
And it's about balance within that entire system and how we provide an equitable space for everyone.
Sure.
So, all right. So I'm going to make up one of my own as we've kind of talked about this. So here is mine. Fact or fiction, Katie?
All right.
Driving 4 miles per hour over the speed limit is okay.
Okay, so I believe that's fiction, personally. But I kind of want to say it's fact because I think you will have an actual meltdown if I say that it's true. But obviously it's not true. Speeding is not good for, as we talked about, the environment in which you are speeding in. It is not good for safety. It is not good for livability, as we've already discussed. I mean, speed limits exist for a reason. They're based on a number of factors, including the road condition, including the environment in which the road is built and what it's designed to do, and the surrounding environment. So it's really important that you abide by those speed limits, obviously. You might think that 3, 4, 5 miles over, it's not going to get me a ticket necessarily, which if MPD is listening to this, they would tell me, don't even say that because you can get a ticket for going 1 mile over the speed limit. But you might think it's not a big deal, but when you consider if every vehicle going through there is going 3 miles over, then 4, then 5, then 9. It just creates and exacerbates this problem of making it unsafe and unlivable for the surrounding environment.
Exactly. It becomes a chronic issue that then limits and creates an even bigger issue as it relates to taking other forms of mobility. So those that maybe are listening, it's very important to recognize that if you are a big advocate for walking or a big advocate for other forms of mobility, biking and things like that, if you have people that that use those types of powered chairs and things, don't speed, because chronic speeding across an entire community really does create a very negative environment for other people to use it. And it's really interesting. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, there should be, I wish there were more people that would walk, or I wish we saw more walkers in Midland, or I wish more kids would bike to school, as an example. The way that we all behave has a direct impact on that type of choice that gets made, because again, like we talked about earlier, people make these decisions largely based off of feeling and safety and convenience. Those are huge decision makers when it comes to the form of transportation that people use. Oh yeah, we hear a lot of people saying, I don't see anyone biking down Buttles. Right. I don't see anyone crossing at some of these intersections as a pedestrian. Well, there's probably some reasoning for that, and a lot of it has to do with driver behavior and the speed limits and the speed of traffic. Certainly. And traveling through there. Absolutely. And design. And design, definitely. Something to consider. Yes. So as we talk a lot about this and kind of drawing sort of things a little bit more together in this, I do have an easy one for you, Katie. Oh boy. Yes. I like easy ones. Okay. So fact or fiction? Okay. Streets only exist for cars. Oh man. Okay. I feel like we've already discussed this one like 8 times, but yes, that's fiction. Absolutely. We've talked about it and will without a doubt continue throughout this podcast. And even as we continue to, really go through the master planning process even and kind of look at what is the future of the community that we really want up to 2050 and beyond. We realize more so now than ever, I think, or not since a long time, streets exist for people, not just for vehicles.
You know, are there people in those cars? Absolutely. Are there people that need to bike? Are there people that want to bike? Are there people that want to walk? Are there people that need to cross the street? You know, everybody has an equal right to that infrastructure performing for them. Ultimately, if you live in this community, whether you own an automobile or not, you have a stake in that roadway, because we're all a part of this community at the end of the day, and the transportation networks of our community play a huge role in how livable and desirable a place is to live. Whether you're paying, you know, a gas tax or not does not matter.
Or a road millage.
Or even a road millage.
Yes.
We do have a couple of those in the city as well.
Yes.
When you think about the way that our first road networks were designed, they weren't made for cars. You know, you hear a lot of people saying, well, the road was built for a car. Well, maybe the current environment was predominantly because of motordom, built for a vehicle. But when you think about the initial history of that roadway, it was probably built for a wagon, people walking, horses, bicycles. The invention of the automobile was only, 150 years ago. I'm terrible with history, so don't quote me on that. But it wasn't until motordom really took force and people used vehicles a lot as their primary mode of transportation that we started to get this thinking in our society of only cars belong on streets and nobody else should be there. And not only is that kind of a selfish way of thinking, but it's dangerous too, because then if you're in a vehicle and you feel like you're the only one that's allowed to use it, you tend to drive a little more unsafely when you come across other methods of transportation, or you just don't feel safe and you don't feel comfortable interacting with them.
Absolutely.
So, you got to remember, people move in a lot of different ways. And I think we're kind of shifting back now away from that motordom concept. It's going to take us time to get there.
Oh, it will. And it definitely took us time to get to such a heavy built environment for cars.
Yeah.
And there are certainly older parts of the city that were designed originally for horse and buggy and other types of things.
Yeah.
People walking, and certainly a lot of our new infrastructure has been built for the car. It's expensive to take. That's one other point I kind of wanted to point out on this too, is as we add additional lane miles, as we add a lot more linear feet of pipe underneath the roads and everything, when we think about long-term capital maintenance in the city, it is very expensive to facilitate a very suburban, auto-oriented type of development.
Absolutely.
And it takes a lot of money to be able to repair those streets and everything as we continue to move into the future. So that's important and kind of relates to all of this too. But one of the other things too that I've thought was rather interesting that I've seen a lot of planning magazines and things focus on is this notion of people and spending time outside and kids playing outdoors.
Yeah.
We hear a lot often at the city. I've heard lots of feedback from different residents saying, I wish that there were more kids playing outside and that they were doing things within their neighborhoods. And I remember, and I think back to maybe the people that are saying that and the type of environments that they had. There weren't as many cars. There weren't cars that were moving as quickly. Now, there certainly were some cars and some that moved quickly, but we've built such a heavy auto-oriented type of place that it's not as natural or second nature for people to want to use those environments, to maybe use that street to play baseball or other things like that you kind of see some in movies and stuff. Not saying that that's what we should be encouraging, but yet it all has an impact on how we are interacting within our own neighborhoods. And if we're simply getting in our car, rolling or having the garage go up, pull out of the driveway, leave, come back to the house a little bit later, go into the garage, drop that garage door, and we never really interact with anyone else, well, then the type of environment that we're creating is very non-communal and doesn't have that kind of opportunity like you would if you're biking or walking and things like that. So that all relates, and it is all part of design at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And if you've ever listened to Mayor Donker talk, I know this is something she's very passionate about, is the concept of neighboring and creating not just a physical neighborhood in terms of building homes close together that have a residential street, maybe some sidewalks, maybe a park. Yep. It goes so far beyond the physical attributes. It's the emotional attachment people get to their neighborhoods and really cultivating that. In a lot of ways, like you said, that we can create that neighboring environment is by making it feel like a community. And if all you're doing is driving to and from, not interacting with anyone, maybe it's not safe to be outside because of the amount of traffic nearby, that's not going to lend itself to people feeling connected to where they live. Yep. And at the end of the day, that's the most important part of what we do, I think, at the city, is making people not only, want to live here, but to want to stay here and build a family here and to feel a connection to this community. So, yep, that's definitely what we want to do.
I should also say, too, a lot of times we talk about interaction and social groupings and sort of the social infrastructure of the community around places where we do gather, like the Tunes by the Tridge as an example, or other parks, or possibly even Little League fields and things like that. These are public spaces that do facilitate people to come together and do things. And a lot of times we hear very good things from the community really related to the types of events that are held, like 4th of July, for example, or Tapped on Main Street or other things. When you think about those public spaces, we usually think of a park, or we think of a specific area in downtown, or maybe the Tridge or something like that. Our road network is our largest public space asset. And those neighboring types of conversations that end up happening, or even block parties that some neighborhoods choose to do, those are huge to build community and to be able to build a place where people are going to want to stay, and they're going to want to put down roots and have those types of connections that are going to make their lives better and just more fulfilling. And I really think that if we think about streets as a public space resource, the opportunities are really endless, and we have a very important way of being able to think differently as we go forward, and to be able to make that as a better place for the community to be able to interact and to build the type of things that we need for the future.
That's actually a really good point that I didn't really consider until now, that when you add up the amount of space, and we have one of the largest, I think the largest parks network, for example, in our region, more than the next 3 cities combined. You think about public space, and we're like, we got tons of that. Well, then you think about the amount of sprawl, like we talked about earlier, in this massive street network that we have. It's just amazing to think about all this space, and we've mostly dedicated it to just cars for a long time, and that really limits the users that can access it. So speaking of block parties, if you want to block your street off, for example, you can do that. Don't just do it on your own. We'll set you up at the city. We'll bring out some road closure barricades and make sure it's nice and safe for you. But contact the Community Affairs Department, because we facilitate those. And we will get you all set up with everything that you need to have a nice, safe block party. And we strongly encourage that. A lot of people think they're not going to let me close a road to have a barbecue. I mean, we go through the proper channels. This is absolutely the kind of community we want to build.
Totally. So, and lots of neighborhoods do it all the time in the city. It's really a fantastic thing.
Yep, absolutely. So get a hold of us, and we'll walk you through that process. It's pretty painless, and we will make sure you have the block party of your dreams on our largest public piece of space.
Absolutely.
So this has been fun. We kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit there, but I like that when we do that. So I hope everyone learned something from this fact or fiction episode today. I feel like we all kind of did. I have a better understanding now of kind of how we all can share the roadway stay safe, no matter what method of transportation we decide to use. So that is all for this installment, but we will be back next month with another episode and more updates, hopefully soon, on the Buttles and Indian Corridor Improvement Project. If you want to be notified as soon as new episodes come out, which is the 3rd Thursday of every month, you can subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at City of Midland MI. See you soon, and slow down. This has been Word on the Streets, a podcast created by the City of Midland, Michigan, and produced by the MCTV Network. For more information on this podcast, or to learn more about the Buttles and Indian Corridor Improvement Project, visit cityofmidlandmi.gov/corridors.